Hello, it's Kareem here, and welcome to Does It Matter? Uh, Having a chat today about definitions. Um, Definitions are kind of super important because without them, we can't get to the meat, we can't pass reality down to its fibers and work out what is and what isn't, and what might be and when it is and when it isn't, and so on and so on. We can't get to the existential reality of a thing without defining it. And it lets us drill down into the core of what it is to be a thing, place, person, animal, particle, whatever. The problem with definitions are that, like any other conceptual tool, they can be defined. They can be used to narrow down the scope or broaden the scope. Okay, ideally both. If the science is working the way it should, if you're applying enough critical thinking and enough data collection, it will eventually, even if it's narrowing things down, broaden the scope. It'll open up vistas of new possibilities and new contexts and options that should broaden the field of study rather than narrow it. That's not always the case, particularly when it comes down to well-studied areas like particle physics, though recently there has been some broadening again because of recent discoveries, but that's for another video. But as a general rule, narrowing down should eventually broaden out. What I've noticed in society with our definitions is that in relation to politics, sociology, identity politics, and the pernicious nature of that, we have defined ourselves into a corner. We have defined things in such a way that, narrow or broad, we still are painting ourselves into a corner, because definitions should include nuance. In fact, by nature, when you're defining a narrow range of possibilities, you're trying to pass them back and tease back to the core mechanics of a thing. By nature, you should be expecting variations. You should be expecting a spectrum of results. The problem with coming at things from a political point of view or a religious point of view, or from an entrenched philosophical point of view rather than a critical reasoning point of view, is that you are deliberately imposing bias. Now, one of the things about science and philosophy to a lesser degree is that they've evolved to try to remove bias as much as possible, because human beings are just we're great big fat bias machines. We produce bias like we produce poop. Okay, we just do. So we have to fight against bias all the time. We're not inherently rational creatures. That's, I guess, another aside that I'll go into in more depth at another time. We're social creatures with a strong emotional nature. We have a rational component that we can develop, but it's not our core nature at all. Reasoning is a tool for us. It's not an endemic part of our nature. We experience life through our emotions, through our feelings, and so we deify them. And different cultures and different groups will give more or less weight to those feelings, but they're important regardless. The problem is they create enormous biases. Okay, we run down the anecdotal path of prejudice until eventually, even when we're trying to avoid prejudice and be as inclusive and diverse as possible, we end up excluding whole ranges of people who don't think the same way as us. And therein rests the trap of definition. What does diversity mean? What does inclusiveness mean? See, I like both those ideas. They're fantastic ideas. Fantastic ideas. Where they run into problems is when people, one, either very poorly define them so they can mean almost anything, okay, and to some degree they can. I mean, diversity is diversity. It's just the spectrum of possible. That's inherently what it is. And inclusiveness is to include, to not exclude, perhaps by inference. You are not to exclude, or to try not to exclude, to include as much as possible. I mean, there's limitations. You're not going to include a ravening psychopath like Jeffrey Dahmer that ate 58 people and kept their body parts floating around the place and frozen. No, there's obviously limitations to inclusiveness and diversity. Grey goo nanobots eating the world. Well, perhaps we should limit diversity to things that don't kill us and destroy us, nuclear weaponry, things like that. We don't want to be so diverse that we usher in the end of us. So obviously there's limitations to these definitions that are natural, but what happens is survival orientated, evolutionary orientated parameters. But we have ideological parameters now telling us what inclusiveness and diversity and tolerance are. And the one thing that they don't seem to have is a tolerance and inclusiveness of diversity of ideas. Okay? There's a lot of really wacky ideas out there. I have friends across the spectrum from centre-right. I don't have many MRA sort of alt-right guys. They don't tend to like me very much. But I have guys who are definitely conservative. And I have friends who are sit smack in the middle and don't really care. And I have friends who are centre-left and a couple of, ravening far lefties. And they cover the whole spectrum. Conspiracy heads. I've got friends who are conspiracy heads. I've got a friend who believes in flat earth. Really do. He's a smart guy, in a way. Because there's a block there somewhere. Love the guy to death, though. Okay? Love him to death. I don't let that get in the way. So what if he has a funny belief? So what if he's weird? So what? It doesn't matter. That's inclusiveness. Okay? He might have traits and habits I don't like and don't agree with. He might be somewhat misogynistic. She might be somewhat of a misandrist. Who knows? You don't throw them away because they're not fucking perfect. Okay? You can ask for certain behavioural traits when they're with you. You can negotiate. And that's the term that's often forgotten in all this modern identity politics conversation is negotiate. For fuck's sake. It's a negotiation. Life is a negotiation. You're supposed to talk about it. We're supposed to do deals. And then sometimes there's room for renegotiation down the track if context change, circumstances change. Definitions have to be flexible. They have to be pertinent to the facts. Okay? They have to consider our feelings, but they have to be still largely pertinent to the facts. And they have to be the product and result of an agreement between people as to what is, what isn't, what can be, what may be, what and when it can. Okay? And that has to include everyone. It has to include Nazis. It has to include far left, raving, froth-biting Marxists. I used to be one, so I know what they're like. It has to include neoliberals. But yes, it does. Okay? It has to include laissez-faire libertarians, many of whom I really like, and argue with furiously, but it's wonderful. It has to include everyone. It has to include the whole spectrum of human ideas, good, bad, and ugly. Otherwise, we're not really being inclusive, are we? We're not being diverse. We're fucking hypocrites. And I don't want to be a hypocrite. You shouldn't want to be a hypocrite either. All right? We're defining ourselves into a corner with these stupid, narrow definitions that don't adequately consider nuance, don't adequately consider the nature of reality, which is biological in nature, psychological layers on top of that. There's an interaction between the biological through an epigenetic layer, which we don't fully understand. Human beings are very flexible, capable of operating outside of their strict biological parameters. However, there's a price to pay for that. The further we move from our biological and anthropological inclinations, the more problems we tend to develop. Okay? And that doesn't mean that we can't do that, but we're going to have to recognize that there's a price to be paid. We have to recognize that people's experiences are going to be different as well, because not only do we vary as genders or sexes, but we also vary as individuals. There are different genetic bloodlines. There are at the risk of being called all kinds of horrible names because people don't understand science, okay, there are differences between different population groups in the world. Some people get sickle cell anemia, some people don't. Some people are really tall, some people's are really short. Some people's have epicanthic folds, some people's don't. These are facts. These are facts. There's loads of genetic differences between groups, and there's even more genetic differences between individuals. All right, these are facts. And if we can't discuss these things because the nature of diversity and inclusiveness in so much of what's politically correct today won't allow it, then we're not very diverse in our thinking, and we're not being very inclusive of the fucking facts. Let's just try to remain in the real world. Let's stay real. Keep it real. As Ali G used to say, let's keep it real. All right? And try and stay in the fucking world and not in this rarefied mental continuum, which is fucking mental. All right? That's all for today. I had to have a little rant about the hypocrisy of the existing corporate, public service, governmental framework where everyone's running around madly trying to avoid stepping on each other's toes while they actually end up tyrannizing each other. The irony is, in an attempt to protect each other's feelings and look after everyone, we're becoming tyrants. We're leading to authoritarianism. We're actually bullying each other with an insistence on a particular set of behaviours that not everyone's agreed to, but a particular set of thinking and conduct that no one's agreed to. It's not inclusive to say that, because this behaviour offends a given group of people, or this poster or thing sitting on your desk is offensive to a group of people, we have to remove it in order to keep the workplace neutral. A neutral workplace is an oppressive workplace that does not encourage diversity or inclusiveness. You just imposed the very thing you're trying to avoid imposing on everyone for the sake of a small group. Instead of trying to shield the small group, come up with some kind of compromise that allows them to feel safer in the workplace. All right, maybe they should also drink a bit of concrete as well. There is a time and place for that. We can all do with a cup of concrete every now and then, okay, and toughen up a little bit, develop some skin. But there's always compromises, negotiations, deals that can be made. And there seems to be no room for that now. It's all hard definitions. We've gone down this neo-Puritan laneway of, Inquisition type thinking. And that's where it ends up going. It ends up going into some very dark and bad places. The left and the right are capable of taking us there, and they will. They love it. As much as the right wing is, loves making fun of the snowflakes, we all do, but they love making fun of the snowflakes. They actually like this identity politics that the left has run away with, because they started it to begin with. And the center of right-wing extremism is identity politics, is in-group politics. They love this shit. Okay, Putin, Xi Jinping in China, they're building their nationalism on the basis of in-group prejudice. And what are we doing? Reinforcing it. It's crazy. All right? You have to make room for everyone. All right? You also have to tolerate each other's differences. Otherwise, you're not fucking inclusive, and you're not being very diverse either. All right? Someone puts something on their desk you don't like, don't fucking look at it. Or if you can't help looking at it, ask them if they can shift it a little bit or do something. Negotiate. Okay? Be an adult. Be a grown-up and sort it out. Ask a friend if you're afraid they won't listen to you. Get a mediator. Work it out. We need to be training people to have actual life skills, not cling to some ridiculous neo-Puritan code that's only going to make things worse. We're better than that. We can be better than that, and we should. Make for more fun, a much more harmonious society, and it makes for actual diversity and actual inclusiveness. It makes for a more fertile society that's going to give birth to more good ideas. It's also going to give birth to a lot of shitty ideas, and you've got to be tolerant of the shitty ideas. My friend believes in flat earth, for fuck's sake. Okay? I've got friends who believe in vaccine conspiracies. Okay? I have friends who believe in all kinds of weird things. I believe some weird shit. Okay? We all do. Get used to it. We should accept it. Doesn't mean you agree with them. Debate those people all the time if you want to. Have fun doing it. Don't turn it into some toxic, nasty exchange where we're battling to death for ideas that eventually will see their day anyway. Eventually they'll become confirmed as real and everyone will see them for what they are. Or they'll be disparaged and pushed to the side because they're crap. Or a relative amount of contextual truth will be found in them, and you'll know that they apply in certain circumstances and not in others, in certain ways and not in others, which is usually the case anyway for most ideas. Most ideas are shit. The ideas that are left are divided into those latter two camps of either being confirmed or at least partly confirmed as somewhat pertaining to reality. Well, let's do that. That's way better than what we've got at the moment. Cheers, guys. See you next time.